So we put together this panel. I invited three of the most distinguished people I could find to talk on it, and I want to introduce them to you, and we will get started. Immediately next to me is the Honorable Mays Middleton, State Senator from Galveston and Chambers County. First elected to the Texas House in 2018, began serving in the Texas Senate this year, 2022. Mays is a champion conservative. He's been fighting taxpayer-funded lobbying for as long as I've known him, and many other things. He's one of the guys that we go to, that we count on to speak his mind, to focus on our conservative values. He's the president of Middleton Oil Company. Next to him, is our first out-of-towner, John Saylor. He comes to us from the National Association of Scholars, where he is a head of research. Is that right? Research? University policy and research. John got himself on the map in Texas. I had an NAS panelist on my panel last year, but he got on the map here in Texas for a report that he wrote on the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of Texas, which laid it out from the beginning, and he's going to talk with us about that. He also, within the last month, and I want him to tell us this story, got a hold of some job evaluations at Texas Tech, employing criteria using diversity, equity, and inclusion, and that's a funny story. That'll be good. And then on the end, let's applause for John Saylor. Last but by no means least, Dr. Walter Wendler, who is the president of West Texas A&M University. That's all it takes. Dr. Wendler is a lifelong academic, but he's got a good path an interesting path that may come up. He is a graduate of the University of Texas, but we're going to forgive him for that. And before being at WT, as they call it out there in Amarillo, he was at Southern Illinois University. And Dr. Wendler, I think that I will start it off with you. I would like your observations about how woke ideology and what is known as DEI, which is very deceptive, you've been on campuses a long time. How did this bubble up? When did you first see it, and when were you concerned about it?
Okay, thank you, Sherry, and thanks to all of you for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to share a few insights. I've been at this a long time. I started teaching at LSU before many of you were born, 1975. And there's, I know, a crowd of you. I can tell by looking that we're not yet here. So I've been around it for a long time, and I've watched as universities, and by the way, I'm an architect by training. And in architecture, the sort of central coin of the realm is an idea. And I feel like universities in all disciplines have drifted away from the concept of ideas over the last 30 or 40 years and drifted more towards ideology. And I want West Texas A&M University to champion ideas rather than ideology. And I've also watched as the concept of a performance culture. Some people refer to it as a merit-based culture or a meritocracy. I like to think of it, I don't know why, but I like to think of it as a performance culture. It's based on results. And this fits very nicely into the culture of the Texas Panhandle. It's a tough place. It's a very tough place. And it's a place that champions, I think, I'll say conservative values. As a matter of fact, West Texas A&M University is the most conservative public university in the state of Texas, period. And I say that for three reasons. First, niche, which is not a scholarly organization, the top 8 universities that are considered conservative, we're number 8 on that list, but we're the first public to occur. And many of the smaller names that some of you might not even know are very small faith-based universities and so on. But in terms of our value system in West Texas, not so much the campus value system, although I would like the two to be aligned, because that's our job as a taxpayer-supported institution. It's not to go in there and metropolitanize West Texas. It's to take the values of the people of West Texas and incorporate those into programs that the people of West Texas are satisfied with. And nearly half of our students come from West Texas. And I encourage those students when I talk to them. And I've talked to high schools. I've talked to every high school in Texas north of Klondike. Klondike is 2 hours south of Lubbock. 132 high schools. I've been to every one of them. And I tell students, don't leave your values at home. Don't let somebody talk you out of your value system. Bring it with you and help us save this university at the top of Texas, because we are in a place where that can happen. Part of that is because the people in that region of Texas are largely engaged in the production of 3 things that are very important to the state economy and important to everybody in the United States: food, fuel, and fiber. Those commodities are produced in rural settings, and those rural values, I believe, need to be present at the university and never apologize for. And by the way, I'm from the deepest reaches of East Texas, Brooklyn. You can't get more East Texas than that. And this set of values, I've been absolutely absorbed with it. And by the way, I am a graduate of the University of Texas. Everybody makes but I'm also a graduate of Texas A&M. So I have a sandwich. That's what I like. I have a sandwich. And I began to be acquainted with these values at Texas A&M University because it has, when I was there, I graduated in 1972 with John Sharp and Rick Perry, as a matter of fact. 2 out of 3 isn't bad. I told them that one day, and they said, which 2? I said, you guys figure it out. But at any rate, we are very proud of what we do up there, and this infiltration of ideology over ideas has been a very slow process, but it's taking root, and it's a very difficult process to counteract. But intellectually, it's the only ground we have to stand on as academics. We have to be committed to the fact that we produce ideas and we share those ideas with others so that they can go out and be engaged citizens. So Sherry, that's where I come from on those issues.
Thank you, Dr. Wendler. John, before I go to you, I think Senator Middleton, I'd like to hear what brought you to this issue? What are your constituents telling you? Is this something that we only see? A lot of people here I know are campus champions, are involved in that. What are you hearing from in Galveston County?
Oh, it's a very real issue. Is this working here? No. Can you hear? No. And look, what this really goes back to is we're supposed to, through education, it's K-12 and higher ed as well, is provide a quality of opportunity, right? So we need to put more tools on the table for the next generation. But unfortunately, what DEI is it's pushing a quality of outcome, right? And a quality of outcome at the end of the day, equity, another word for it, right, is socialism. And our universities are supposed to be about excellence, right? But excellence through achievement, right? Achievement. And so what DEI is doing is trying to eliminate that achievement. And really what it is a war on merit at the end of the day, because we want to provide these tools and make sure that that next generation has that equality of opportunity, but then it's up to you whether or not you use them, and you got to put a lot of hard work into it and go out there and succeed. And that's the American dream. That's the Texas dream. And largely that's being discouraged or eliminated with policies like DEI. So that's why this is such an important issue. That Texas grit, is in our DNA, and DEI is really the opposite of that.
Yeah, one way that I explain it is I played basketball in high school, but I never really had a shot at the NBA. So that's equality, but not equity. John, what did you find when you started looking at the University of Texas and DEI?
Yeah, so I think it might be helpful to give a little bit of a broader look at what DEI entails, and that's really what encouraged me to take a look at UT. So nationally, university after university, they're following basically the same trend that imposes the priorities of DEI onto virtually every part of university policy, from faculty hiring to what goes into the curriculum to what the courses students have to take to the training that faculty have to undergo when they want to do virtually anything within the university. So what that looks like in practice are a couple of things. So first, we have seen this national trend of required DEI litmus tests for promotion, tenure, and hiring. And just today, actually, I wrote a report for the Wall Street Journal on some of the rubrics used for assessing these diversity statements, which job applicants at a number of very, very prestigious universities or very, very high-ranking universities had to submit. So in order to get a job at, for instance, in order to get a job at the University of South Carolina right now through their NIH-funded program, candidates have to submit a diversity statement. The rubric for evaluating that diversity statement essentially dictates that the job candidates must believe precisely what the senator here has pointed out is integral to DEI. It states very clearly that a candidate should receive a low score for saying that they believe that they want to ignore the varying backgrounds of their students and treat everyone the same. That is a direct quote. If you say you want to treat everyone the same, you will be penalized in your job application, and in cases where it is heavily weighed, you'll likely not be able to get the job. Likewise, these priorities are being inserted into curricula all over the country. For instance, Northern Arizona University adopted a 4 diversity course requirement for all of its undergraduates. Its diversity curriculum committee specifically said that certain courses couldn't count because those courses did not integrate critical race theory, which is an expectation of the diversity committee. So 4 courses rooted in critical race theory. When I publicized this, the regents in Arizona, with their strong backbone, decided to reduce that from 4 to 3 and change the name of the course requirement. And you see all over the country universities applying basically these principles to faculty and student training outside of the classroom. In a case which I'll state right up front, if you're giving a training and you are not a professor, you have absolutely no academic freedom. You're speaking on the behalf of the university, and there's nothing legally or in principle that should keep the state from regulating what you say. In this case, we can only follow the words of the National Association of Diversity Officers in Higher Education when they say that really you should be following the thought of Ibram Kendi in applying this work. So that's
talk about him a little bit. I think we have a range of people, so tell people about white fragility and all that.
Yeah, so Ibram, right, I forget. Ibram Kendi is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist. He is famous for basically distilling the worst parts of critical race theory into slogans and then repeating these slogans over and over again, for thousands and thousands of dollars in invited lectures and things like that. He's an incredibly influential figure in the so-called anti-racist movement, and his driving principle is essentially that we should be maximally race conscious. That means instead of trying to, like I referenced earlier, ignore the varying backgrounds of people and just treat everyone the same. He says no. The answer to past discrimination is present discrimination. The answer to present discrimination is future discrimination. His vision of anti-racism involves always putting your thumb on the scale in order to balance out virtually everything. Equality of outcome through policy. And that is very much the kind of thing that we see inculcated through these training sessions that are ubiquitous in higher education. And I wanted to point out the ubiquity in higher education because I think that helps frame what is happening in Texas right now and what will likely happen in Texas because it's happening in universities across the country, regardless of who's in office in those states and regardless of how conservative the surrounding area might be. So to give basically two examples of how that's happening, I'll point to UT and I'll point to Texas Tech. So at UT, I wrote a long report on how DEI has essentially taken over every aspect or at least invaded every aspect of the university. This comes, first of all, in various requirements for job applications, promotion, and tenure. In order to, their most recent faculty diversity action plan specifically said we need to create mechanisms to recognize contributions to diversity and inclusion in our promotion and tenure policy. Likewise, the edicts of DEI have infiltrated what is taught in the classroom. That's through a number of departments and colleges within the university specifically creating their own diversity action plans in which they say that we now need to create required courses that focus on issues of equity, that focus on issues of DEI. And given the track record of those terms, I think it's fine for us to basically view them with maximal suspicion and say, yes, we know how you use the term equity, and we know what that means. And in cases where universities are saying that we're going to require courses on equity in finance or equity in business or equity in law, we can see that for what it is. It's a kind of politicized course requirement that every student has to take, and that's a big problem. And then the other example I want to point to is the example of Texas Tech University, which I wrote about last month. So Texas Tech University's Department of Biological Sciences created a DEI resolution just specific to the department. In that resolution, they said two things. First, they said that we are now going to require and heavily weigh diversity statements for all job applications. Second, and conveniently for me, they also said that they were going to have each committee issue a report on the DEI contributions of every job applicant for jobs starting around 2020. It was summer of 2020 when the resolution was adopted. Through a public records request, I acquired those reports. I acquired the reports that Texas Tech's biology department made summarizing the DEI contributions of each of their finalist job candidates for about 8 or 10 jobs. And what I saw there was basically the Texas Tech applying that rubric that I described earlier. So one candidate, they write in their review, said, and I'm paraphrasing, but this is almost an exact quote, the candidate said that DEI was not an issue for him because he respects his students and treats them all equally. This demonstrates a lack of understanding of diversity and equity issues. Another candidate was praised for bringing up a land acknowledgement in his interview with the DEI committee. Still other candidates were penalized for not focusing on issues of race and gender, even though they did talk about other versions of diversity. You go through these documents and you can see a clear pattern where the edicts of DEI, most of all, this idea that we should be maximally race conscious, that we should be maximally focused on attaining equal outcomes through policy, that was essentially a requirement. You at least as a job applicant had to say that you agreed with, or had to not run afoul of these ideas in order to not be penalized by the people assessing you for the job that you wanted to get. And now we have a word for this. It's a political litmus test. But it's also a pretty good example of what DEI policies look like in action through virtually any area of university life. And it's a big problem, and I think that it's a very good thing and an essential thing for policymakers and university leaders to take this issue very seriously, because the future of the university, I think, is at stake.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Thank you, John, for laying that out so clearly, Senator Middleton, and then Dr. Wendler. The budget I looked at, Senator Middleton, has $27 billion in it for higher education. And I know the Big Six went out and asked for another billion that they would need if they didn't raise tuition. So dealing with what they tell us about academic freedom, what do you think? How can we go after this?
There's a whole bunch of money in our public universities. I think the Puff is making $8 million a day in royalties, I believe, for our state mineral lands. So that's a permanent university fund, which for now excludes Tech and U of H, but it's really UT and A&M, and that's just our state mineral lands, mainly in the Permian. So, America's energy independence is contributing to that, which I've always thought is ironic that that they're pushing, Green New Deal, shutting down oil and gas when they're funded by, our great oil and gas production that we're seeing at $8 million a day in royalties. So
it's a set-aside.
It is. It's basically a sovereign wealth fund, essentially. We have it with the permanent school fund as well, but this is for our universities with the PUF. But at the end of the day, this is the whole picture, right? Because it does involve critical race theory. And one of the tenets of critical race theory is systemic racism, which means that racism is embedded in our Constitution. It's embedded in our form of our constitutional republic. It's embedded in our government. It's embedded in everything. And it's actually the opposite of what Dr. Martin Luther King taught, which he said very famously, which I hope we all live by, and that we're judged by the content of our character and not the color of our skin. Well, CRT is actually the opposite of that. And as we've seen, we passed a ban on critical race theory in our K-12. We need to expand that ban to our higher ed as well. I see a school board member right here today. Unfortunately, Texas Association of School Boards, which is a taxpayer-funded lobbying group, actually supports critical race theory. They have it in their statement of beliefs. So your property taxes are going to that, by the way, everyone. Should all be upset about that. And unfortunately, we're paying for these things that we know are bad. Look, at the end of the day, America is about equality of opportunity and fostering the next generation by giving the tools they need to succeed and go out there and start a business, own a home, high-paying careers. And unfortunately, what we're seeing not just with DEI, but with CRT as well, where they want to force an equality of outcome, right? And anytime you're doing that, that's socialism at the end of the day. And so justice in the mind of the DEI supporters is government intervention, so the heavy hand of government forcing an equality of outcome, right? An equality outcome means you're taking from someone, right? So if we're going to carry that out, why doesn't everyone just get a 80, regardless of whether or not come to class, right? I mean, if we're just going to not have merit anymore, is that the end of that? Because it certainly fits with DEI, where they will punish you. So it's just mentioned, if you say, look, I believe everyone should be treated equally, X, red X, right? So to me, when you stand on something like that, where you're saying that people should be punished and actually not get grants, not get various research projects, not, I guess, receive a promotion or department head or whatever it is, because they say, hey, I think everyone should be treated equally. That is a real problem, and the state of Texas should not be paying for that.
Dr. Wendler, what does it look like inside? I mean, you're part of a big system. We know throughout the system there are varying levels from very entrenched DEI to, as you say, not so much, from campus to campus. What's it like to work in that environment, and what do you see people doing, both positively and negatively inside?
Well, frequently, the voices for certain curricular actions may be a small percentage of the faculty, but they carry big megaphones, and there's a resistance to contradict what that small voice or the limited number of voices with a big megaphone say, and that's the problem. For me, I would rather go back to basics. I would rather say, okay, if Northern Arizona University wants to create 4 courses in DEI, I have a hard time even saying those words because they've been so twisted out of, I don't use them actually, usually I'm using it right now. But the bottom line is, what has to be sacrificed? In Texas, we have limits in universities about how many hours a baccalaureate degree can be. It's 120 hours. If you put 4 courses in DEI, what is subtracted from the curriculum to allow those courses to be offered within, or otherwise the degrees might be 150 or 60 hours and take 5 years, which unfortunately they take sometimes now. But the bottom line is they're still doing 120 hours. And what I would rather do, and it's what I'm trying to do by the bully pulpit that I have at West Texas, is to get us to focus more on basic coursework. We have 6 hours legislatively proscribed, 6 hours of history and 6 hours of political science. And I don't know, I studied it at TPPF a number of years ago. Tom Lindsay told me about this last night. I asked him about it, did a study on how many substitutions for those basic courses are made at the University of Texas. And the number was high. I can't remember exactly what it is, but it might have been 30% of the time. And the fact of the matter is, I think in our nation and in our state, we need to understand national history. We need to understand national political science, how the world works from a political perspective. And we need to understand state and local politics and history. Those things are critical. And what happens is, and I call them metropolitanized because they don't come from West Texas. They come from other places. But those values and so on embedded in that kind of thinking they're certainly not the general values of the people of the Texas Panhandle. And I can say that with some authority. Having visited all these schools, I have looked, I didn't finish this thought before, on the most conservative public university in Texas, but I studied the voting records of the 38 counties that are home to public universities in the state of Texas in the 21st century. Every presidential election, 04, 8, 12, 16, and 20. 5 cycles of presidential elections. And Randall County, that's home to West Texas A&M University, voted more conservatively, and you have to take the shorthand on that, Republican versus Democrat, which is not always the best indicator, but it's close, more conservatively than any other county consistently, in those 82% were conservatives. And I think what's important is the people up there vote. They actually participate. That's not true in every case. But I think those things are exceedingly important, and I think focusing on the basics, going back to the basics, teaching people American history, teaching our students the values of being an American, the values of being a Texan, how our political system works, people don't know. I mean, I've seen some of these things on television where they ask people, who was Ronald Reagan. They don't even know. They don't even know about bedtime for Bonzo, no less one of the greatest presidents the university the institution, this nation has ever seen. Anyway.
What about, and I want to follow up on all of you and then ask you to respond to this, John, but seems to be, we do prescribe courses legislatively, and I think it's before you came, Senator Mays, maybe in 2017, the legislature passed an important bill, and the bill was that if you had paid for your coursework at a Texas university and you transferred to another university, they couldn't ask you to pay for it again. And we thought that was very important for taxpayers. If you took your basic history class at Texas Southern and then you transferred to UT couldn't come in and say you've got to take another class. What we learned was that UT immediately went about trying to circumvent that rule, creating these flag classes. Was, yeah, you can take that, but in order to move forward on your degree, you're going to have to take these other classes. And I wanted to, in your report, what I was struck by are the different responses that these heavily DEI-focused universities have, the kind of nuanced responses to these kinds of reforms. They never say, oh, we're right. Usually when going up in the government, they don't say, oh, you know, you guys are right. If you look at the response that's happened since Governor Abbott's edict, the memo he sent out, and said in Texas, just want to remind colleges and universities and state agencies, we hire on merit. Anything else is illegal. Period. It's very straightforward. That's what we hire on. And basically, all the universities, and if this was a come to Jesus moment for them, then I'm happy. But all of them said, oh yeah, we get it. We get it. We're done. What's your prediction about that, John? I'm benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, so I am very skeptical that the policy of mandatory diversity statements will end in any other way than official legislation or official university policy passed by trustees or regents or somebody who has the authority to say to put it to an end with finality. The history of diversity statements is actually very interesting because they began in the University of California system. The University of California system had a dust-up over academic freedom in the McCarthy era, where professors were very upset that they were required to sign loyalty oaths to the United States. And because of this, there was a kind of national debate over what academic freedom is, its role, and as a result, the UC system passed a policy saying that we will not allow any political tests for employment. Now, right there, you would expect then that they could never ask people to submit a diversity statement. DEI, as I think many in this room would agree, carries certain obvious political connotations. If you look at what DEI policies, how they're applied in practice, they're applied with a heavy ideological gloss, and it's pretty clear that requiring people to demonstrate their commitment to these principles is not in any way different than requiring some other kind of political test. But in the University of California system, they persist, they flourish, and what many universities say is just that, this is how we define excellence. There's a concept that is, very much embraced by people in higher ed called inclusive excellence. So they say a part of merit involves your ability to demonstrate these kinds of commitments. And because of that, because of enough examples like that, where there is an official policy that says that is unclear or that doesn't forcefully address the issue enough, universities will say they are complying, and they will continue to they'll continue to offend. They'll continue to do the wrong thing. So I think that the only way to fix it is through some kind of legislation.
Do you have a thought on that before I respond?
Oh, I agree. A diversity, equity, inclusion statement it really is a oath of allegiance, essentially, to a particular ideology. It's a political oath of allegiance as well, and this is spilling over to the students as well. I saw something the other day where it said 57% of students in higher ed have at some point had to censor themselves because they were afraid to communicate their ideology or what they really believed in to administrators, professors. And then a lot of professors don't like it either. I saw something about half of university professors don't support DEI, but they're afraid to really say anything about it because of retaliation and or not getting promotion or all the bad things that could happen if they don't toe the ideological line. And I read something else about how it really is stifling innovation, because our public universities were supposed to be our flagships that really bring about the kind of innovations that make Texas and America great, that do the really big things, the big important things. And there was a good quote, and it was actually a researcher, and he said, it's creating fake standards with fake research. And that's what he believed it was really doing. So, and we've seen retaliation elsewhere. This is in basically every segment, including athletics as well. Wanted to make sure to mention why we need to pass the Save Women's Sports Act this session, because unfortunately, men are being allowed to unfairly compete against biological women in college sports, and it's stealing victory, it's risking scholarships, it's risking their place on the team, and it's not right. And Riley Gaines, probably a lot of y'all heard of her. She was really the first to kind of speak up very loudly, and she had many fellow athletes come to her and say, "Thank you. I've wanted to do that, but I was afraid of the retaliation that would come if I did." So somebody's got to be the first in this. So I agree that it's got to be legislative, though. It's got to be a legislative fix.
Help me understand a little bit more about working inside the university system. And again, I don't want that, what did you say, inclusive excellence? Mm-hmm. It's another twisting of words. I would say inclusive excellence is what we have in this room today. Inclusive excellence is Texas Public Policy Foundation. I mean, with coming from everywhere. But you talked about it starting at the University of California, and I have said, and others have said, that if Gavin Newsom found out that at the University of California system they were teaching capitalism and merit and independence on those campuses, that people were required to sign statements saying they believed in American exceptionalism, that he would have that closed down before his first latte. And yet, here in Texas, where our very conservative governor appoints conservative regents to these universities, we have some regents, former regents in the room, people that have principles, but what happens in the faculty governance, and how does that overcome? The law reads, regents govern, right? The law reads that the regents are in charge, but how does that work on the actual campus? Maybe you could start, Dr. Wendler, from what you see, and John, you can tell us from what you've learned.
Well, again, I'll go back to the size of the megaphone. Even though it's held by a very few people, they very loudly proclaim certain ideas, and the resistance to those ideas with reason and facts and empirical evidence and so on and so forth is often overshadowed by the loudness of the voice. And that happens on campus. In a sense, at the board level, I don't know exactly how all that works. I've been close to it at a number of different institutions and seen close operations. But I actually think, at least at Texas A&M, our regents are working hard to be balanced and level-headed, and I would even say tough about these issues. That's my view of them. That's how I feel. I mean, they provide a lot of latitude for us in West Texas to be West Texans. And I believe personally that it's working. It certainly works for us. It might be different if we were located in Houston or something. I don't know. I can't speak for any of that. I can just speak for myself in the geographic location where I am and trying to understand the people that are there. I believe that we get a lot of opportunity to be responsive locally, and I think that's very important. One size doesn't fit all, and I think that the locale plays a big role in this, and I think that thoughtful leadership at every level should recognize this. Myself, that's how I feel about it. But I do feel that people literally get shouted down sometimes for having an alternative point of view, which just 15 years ago was mainstream. I frequently think to myself, if my mom was alive and saw some of what went on college campuses, she would be literally beside herself. She would say, this can't be. This isn't why you went to college, which I would agree, it wasn't why I went to college. I went to college, I happen to be an architect. I went to college to learn a trade. Don't apologize for that. And that's what I did. But now we're being, too many times at college, their small group again believes that we should be teaching students how to think and what to think, and that's our job, and it's not our job. It is not our job.
John, what do you see in red states? How Texas is not the only red state. You mentioned University of South Carolina. I know we're having big battles in the University of North Carolina. Oh, I'm sorry. So what do you see in red states?
Yeah. Recognizing that there are former regents in the room, I proceed with some hesitation.
That's why I warned you.
For the most part, leadership, university leadership appointed by red states has been very bad. For the most part, it has been a disappointment, and the people who could stand up against certain policies that have become ubiquitous have not. So in some red states, you see things like what's happened at The Ohio State University, which has initiated a 150-person cohort hire or cluster hire focused explicitly on issues of race and equity, which means that virtually about, I would say, 30% of all of the faculty jobs listed on the Ohio State University website right now have some connection with ideas about equity, social justice, or a very politicized understanding of race baked into the very job listing. So for instance, the Department of Philosophy, the only faculty line they could get was in the philosophy of race, which is a discipline that is not even, to talk about fake standards, it's a fake discipline. It's not even a real discipline. The Department of Slavic Studies, the only job that they could get from the university was a position in indigenous Siberian studies, which again is absurd. It sounds crazy to even say. And that doesn't even include the jobs that are in the Department of Women and Gender Studies, which is, if last I looked, they had a position in queer and trans studies, a professor of queer and trans studies, and that university is overseen by trustees who were appointed in a red state. You saw this, as I mentioned earlier, in Arizona. Those trustees who initially approved 4 courses that were rooted in critical race theory as core courses at Northern Arizona University. They were appointed by a red state governor. And to some extent, it makes sense because in the past, it has not required very much by way of kind of political or engaging in very politically hot topics in order to be a decent trustee. These issues have existed for a long time, but the Cambrian explosion of DEI policies happened in 2020. And so it makes sense that some university trustees just didn't know what hit them. But it's on them, it's on university leadership to take action, and it's on state leadership to appoint people who will govern the universities towards their main mission. Universities exist for the pursuit of truth. What DEI represents is a distortion of that mission to pursue social justice and a specific political goal. It's antithetical, ultimately, and I say this knowing just about as much about DEI as one could possibly know. DEI represents a distortion of that mission. And I'll say that some university trustees are actually doing a good job. And I'll point to my own state of North Carolina as an example that others should follow. So the UNC Board of Governors just passed a policy banning compelled speech for the entire UNC system. That policy, in effect, will ban the use of diversity statements. Of course, that will require buy-in from the trustees at individual universities in UNC, but I have every reason to believe the trustees at UNC Chapel Hill will enforce that policy exactly how it ought to be enforced, because already they are standing up to an immense amount of pressure to create a school of civic life and leadership that's devoted to the idea that universities should exist for the pursuit of truth and not for the inculcation of ideology. And that's the kind of leadership that we need, and it should be, frankly, a litmus test for university leadership going forward, that they should resemble that kind of trustee.
So we're coming down to the wire here, and I have two questions. I'm trying to figure out how to merge them. One of them is, I expect that in the legislative debate, we're going to hear from the universities a lot about accreditation. I want to say that Texas Public Policy Foundation has a kick-ass accreditation reform bill that we think is one of the best in the country, that will that points out that our accreditors are not very good, and that lays down a plan for our university to get new accreditors. So I know you've seen that bill, and if you haven't seen it, John, I want to show it to you. But we believe that we can get rid of that. Oh, we have to do it because of our accreditors, which we heard. But and in our last minute, any of you, what are you thinking about Biden is signing all these laws? So now I'm hearing from universities, well, we can't get National Science Foundation grants. We can't get these grants. We can't get those grants because Biden is signing DEI requirements for that research money. So what's your thought about that?
Well, they're not laws, right? They're executive orders, so that's not law. So that's why about I think the third or fourth bill that I filed was a way to nullify unconstitutional executive orders in order to exercise our 10th Amendment rights, right? I mean, the federal government is a creation of the states. That's what federalism is about. And then, of course, the proper role of government is to protect and defend our God-granted freedoms. So if they're doing that, I know our Attorney General is going to challenge them, and we need to create additional tools to make sure that those unconstitutional executive orders are not implemented in the state of Texas, and that we pass these laws, statutory laws, to have that backup also for our universities and university regents, where we don't have some kind of patchwork quilt of different regulations and different policies in our various state universities, so the state provides that uniformity. So that's another important thing on the legislature acting on this subject and making sure that it's the same for all, because no one should feel like they're not going to get a job or they're not free to express their sincerely held beliefs. And certainly no one should feel like if they convey what they believe in, what their values, that they will suffer negative consequences in this state. That's not right. Free speech is certainly one of the things that the proper role of government is to protect and defend. So that's why this issue is so important.
John or Dr. Wendler, do you have anything to add quickly before we go to Q&A on that? Or?
So I would just add, the problem is immense coming from the federal government. To just give one example, the NIH is currently spending $250 million.
National Institute of Health.
It's spending $250 million to give grants to universities to hire faculty. The main condition for these faculty is that they must submit diversity statements, and those statements must be heavily weighed. That is coming from the federal government. The NSF, other National Science Foundation, and other federal agencies that fund higher education are doing very similar things. And it points to the need for personnel who see the true purpose of the university. And that requires more than just one legislative session. That requires something of a multi-generational process of personnel building, which I think is really the long game here. We have to get to a point where the people in higher education have a respect for academic freedom. They see higher education as about pursuing the truth. And right now, we don't have people like that staffing our federal agencies that oversee grants in higher education. We don't have professors who look at the world that way, and we need to create a lot more opportunity for people who are interested in scholarship to do that kind of thing. Higher education is not going to go away, so what we have to do is think creatively about how to build better personnel, build anew within higher education.
Dr. Wendler, go ahead.
And I'll be very brief. Right now, according to the Times Higher Education analysis, of the 10 best universities in the world, 8 are in the United States. And apart from any ideology on any of these campuses, they still largely produce good science and good discovery. And the fact of the matter is that any kind of ideological imprint on what those universities can do will reduce the creative thought and the intellectual persuasion of what goes on university campuses. And it won't be long, and I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but the fact of the matter is in the next 2 decades, it may flip. 8 of the best universities may be in the Far East, and 2 may be in the United States, because we've worked for 2.5 centuries building higher education institutions on American values and on people standing on their own merits and so on, and we can give it away. We can give it away.
Thank you all. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A. I've got some question people here, so if you have a question, I'll let you pick. Yeah, your choose.
Hi, gentlemen, Vince and ladies. I'm Vince Puente, Fort Worth, Texas. Probably many of the people in the room are like myself. I sit on multiple charitable boards. One in particular I'm thinking about is based in Dallas, deals with children, great organization, $65 million budget per year. There's about 40 or so people on the board. A couple of years ago, DEI started creeping up. I just thought it was another equity thing. And next meeting, this last meeting I was in, there's 4 or 5 people in the department. It's just going full blast. It sounds all cheery. So my question becomes, for persons like myself, let me also throw it. Our board of directors is primarily corporate America. Large CEOs and executives out of corporate America. I'm the exception to that. What tool can someone give me? I'm not intelligent enough to discuss this at their level. So how can I get someone to come with me to see the CEO of the organization, $65 million, touching thousands of kids, touching thousands upon thousands of adults, doing community work in the area, and not to start discouraging this direction, because it's popular. It's the popular thing to do. There's another organization in Fort Worth that is starting to, they feel like they need to bring this on because it's popular with corporate America. And so I think they're not the only charities doing that, not only nonprofits.
Well, you may have answers. Vivek Ramaswamy is talking tomorrow, and of course he has attacked DEI in the corporate sphere. And so I know you'll be at breakfast, and let's talk then, and we can also strategize about that. But I don't know if our panelists have anything you want to add to that, or.
I can say 2 things really quickly. One, often you can just quote these people at their word, and that's enough to show that their priorities might not align with the priorities of your organization. That's often all I have to do. I just quote people who are working in DEI, and it shows a difference in priority. And 2, I guess, these positions often don't contribute to anything that is actually productive. And actually right now what we're seeing in the private sector is a decrease in DEI officers, precisely because, we're seeing a lot of layoffs, and that's an easy job to cut because it's not really something that produces productive outcomes.
Before we move to our next question, I just want to point out that our microphone handler today is Dr. Andrew Gillen, who has done the research for TPPF on accreditation. So, gentlemen, if you don't know him, I invite you to talk with him. He is the bottom line on that issue. Yes, sir.
It is said that history repeats itself. A century ago, we had the eugenics movement, and actually 27 states passed sterilization laws. Could somebody comment on the parallel between what's happening now with critical race theory, DEI, and what happened a century ago with eugenics. The last time it went very, very wrong with the Nazis adopting the ideology, and we know from history what happened.
So, Dr. Wendler, do you remember 100 years ago?
She is cruel and unusual. So you want me to try to answer that question?
I didn't know if you had a thought on it.
Well, I do have a thought in this sense, and it's from my deepest personal beliefs. I'm a practicing Christian, and I believe that we are all created. I hesitate to say this, but you all would know this, but created in God's image and all deserve an equal shot at life, and for me, eternal life. And you know, the idea that somebody is going to determine who comes through the gate and who doesn't is so fundamentally flawed, we should be sick over it. It's just not right. It's anti-intellectual. It's this blunt instrument of neo-Marxism. It's all just wrong. And people need to think, and I think universities especially should be called on to think about what it is that they're doing and be open to liberal debate. I don't mean liberal like liberal as opposed to conservative, but thoughtful debate on how things work. And this doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
Well, and I'll just add that when good people do nothing, evil wins. So let's go do something. You know.
Other questions?
Hello, Janine Washington, LLC, Houston. I think that there is something lost in the translation of some of the terminology and the rhetoric. With woke ideology, to me, as an African American, that is actually a term just saying that we need to be aware of racial discrimination and that it is very much real. Because outside of the university, whatever I'm being taught as a student, I have to walk outside the door and I'm treated differently, or my sons are treated differently. So when it comes to the critical race theory, in my eyes, I'm like, yes, this needs to be taught, maybe not so much at the heavy degree of being part or in part of the accreditation of the hours, but there does need to have to be some type of course that's taught to either if it's personnel or faculty, they need to be aware of what their students are going through so that they can connect to them. So like I said, I feel like it's a loss in translation of it, because when I see woke ideology and that people are trying to go against it, I get offended. Because I'm like, are you trying to erase the fact that my people go through things, whether I'm brown or white? I mean, because it happens with everybody. And it's not that we're trying to get any special treatment or anything like that. Just please be aware of what we go through and that it is hard. And that although it says, you know, we're based on merit and things like that, I have a great value system as well. I'm a God-fearing woman, and I teach my children the same. But it's hard when we come outside of church with people who don't look like us, or we come out of our universities with people who don't look like us, and we're treated differently. So I'm like, yeah, it does need to be some kind of academic course that has to be taught, or training development for instructors and professors, just to say, hey, I'm aware. But like I said, the way that I'm hearing the definition today, it is taken in a negative light, that something's being forced and going to be taken away or what have you, and they're trying to put this woke ideology in with transgender and pride and things like that. That's not what woke means. Not for me. And that's not where that term came from when it first came onto these platforms. So I just wanted to say, like, what can you do to populations and communities that are more diverse and have more minorities to help them understand that, look, it's not so much we're taking away from history or that you're not here, but to really make others see that they are really included and that they have a say in legislation.
I think that's a very important question that you ask, and we can talk about it. I'll respond first. I think It is, we are using a shorthand that maybe we shouldn't be using. I served with Dr. Roberts on the 1836 Commission, which in the goal of that commission was to make sure that we tell the entire history of Texas for all Texans. And we want to make sure that that is in the law, that's in the codes. We want people to know the whole story, from your story today, to the immigration of African Americans to this state, to the terrible record that we have in Reconstruction in this state, Jim Crow in the state. Those are in the law now. Thanks to critical race theory, our anti-critical race theory bill requires that those be taught. And so if we're saying it, if we're lumping woke in there, we're doing it inartfully. Senator, do you have a thought on that?
I think it just is, some of the misinformation out there where eradicating racism, eradicating systemic racism, those are two different things where I think everyone here in this whole building today wants to eradicate racism in all forms. But systemic racism, the problem with adding that word is that regardless of the individual's characteristics or what they believe in or their intent, we're going to assign that to you, right? And I don't think anyone really wants that, but it's the way that it's talked about, right? So it came up the other day where, after the Juneteenth in Galveston, we did a portrait for Opal Lee, and I made sure to point out, because this freedom and this right that all of God's children be free was established here in the state of Texas, and we need to teach that and celebrate that. We had Senator Matthew Gaines, who is a African-American Republican state senator, elected right after Juneteenth, and one of the first things that he advocated for was integration of our schools. I think some of it is just we need to better communicate what it really stands for and what we're really advocating for here. And some of these little things that are added in there that at first may seem innocuous actually aren't. Like the word systemic is not an innocuous word. It's a word that actually ends up with the quality of outcome right at the end of it. And diversity, equity, inclusion statements, of course, are not required to enforce our laws against discrimination. All of those stand firm. They don't get watered down. They don't get amended or negated in any way if we banned diversity, equity, inclusion statements and the equal protection and protections under 14th Amendment, all of that. So I think that is something that we do need to talk about a whole lot more, and I agree with that.
Did you all, John, did you want to say something, Dr. Wendler?
I would say that I usually try to make a distinction between the ideal, or at least what the terms diversity, equity, and inclusion sound like they indicate and what they indicate in practice. And so if I were unaware of the context of American higher education and I were told that I was going to be required to submit a statement talking about my commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion to apply to a job, I think I would probably assume that that's a commitment to very basic values that everybody could agree with. But in practice, what do these policies again and again do? They actually, I think, they push for an ideal that it sounds like your question it actually it sounds like you implied you disagreed with it. You wanted everyone to be treated the same. You wanted people to be treated not like we are endlessly divided and hopelessly going to continue to be divided, but rather we want to seek a kind of unity, and that's not something that I see happening in DEI trainings or through DEI policies, either at the local level or pushed through kind of national organizations, which is why I'm very skeptical of the institution of DEI, because looking at how it plays out in practice, I see a lot of harmful policies that, they on one hand divert the university from its main mission. When you're hiring a virologist, an immunologist, a cell biologist, the thing you should be paying attention to is whether they are competent scientists. And so it is very important to say that that's the priority. We want to uphold that value. the pursuit of truth, really. That these scientists should be able to be the best people possible to pursue the truth, and their ability to repeat, slogans about popular political causes is irrelevant in that case. But at the same time, I think that a lot of DEI policies simply kind of stoke division, and I haven't been able to talk about all of the examples, but I've seen a lot of examples where the end result is a hyper focus on race that I think that we even have good evidence leaves everybody more distrustful of one another. If you look at the evidence about DEI trainings in the workplace context, that's what we see, that it often can leave everybody more distrustful, and that's the kind of thing that should urge us to be very, very cautious, especially in the context where we are talking about institutions devoted to the training of young people in the pursuit of truth.
Dr. Wendler, did you?
I'll be very quick. I really do believe that the challenge that you raise are obviously real challenges, and I think in families and places of worship, a lot of those issues were addressed head on. I tell our campus openly that I think we should live by the golden rule at WT. We should treat others the way we want to be treated. And if everybody did that, of course, we'd live in a perfect world. But the bottom line is, I'm not afraid to say that, even though it sounds a little bit like a Sunday school lesson, but it was affirmed in Scientific American, of all places. They don't call it the golden rule. They call it the law of reciprocity. And I can't remember the woman that wrote the piece, but she said there's not an organized religion in the world that goes against that fundamental belief that we should treat others the way we want to be treated. And it doesn't happen. We abstract others, we classify them, we do all these things, and none of that is right. It's all dead wrong, period.
People have their hands up. Let's do some people in the back or whatever, whomever. Oh, we're out of time. I'm looking here. Should be looking here. Big topic. Lots of work to do. You all should get Senator Middleton's email and start barraging him. Because I'm sure he...
Or Sherry, if I may, if you know people that want to attend college, send them to WT.
So glad you all joined us for this discussion. This is a very tough topic. It's going to be a long fight. We're fighting for school choice so that we can get more Texas kids into college. And once we get them there, we don't want them to have to mess with this. So thank you all for coming. Have the rest of your day.